Hello and welcome to the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast. The intention of this podcast is to open your mind, get curious about yourself and connect to the power you hold within. I am your host, Karen Maloney, an inside-out coach, helping you to believe in yourself and manifest your desires. Check out the podcast, available on all platforms, and go to my website, www.karenmaloney.com for all info. Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to another episode in this cancer series. I am Karen Maloney, your host, and joining me this week I have Mark Cleary. And Mark began practicing martial arts in 1984, which led him to the medicinal practice of Amatsu. He has been practicing as a therapist since 1991. In the field of bodywork, he has studied cranial osteopathy, massage, kinesiology and Amatsu. He has also done extensive studies in the field of esoteric and intuitive practices, including many courses in the Arthur Findley College, the Chopra Centre and numerous workshops around the world. After many years exploring his own personal development under the guidance of esoteric teachers, he was led to the practice of plant medicines. He has practiced and worked in this field for 15 years. And in 2003, Mark began to practice yoga, which led him to India to study traditional Tantra Yoga. In his role as a teacher, he has hosted numerous classes, workshops and retreats over the years, as well as assist in setting up a government-recognised healing school in Denmark, where he hosted classes for 15 years. He has also been treating people at his full-time clinic in Dublin since 1991. So, talking to Mark was a pleasure, and in this conversation he shares about his own journey and his own learnings and how when he went deeper in his own personal practice as well, he found how his touch got lighter and that actually he could just hold space for people, and much healing took place in that space as well. He also talks about his own system that he came up with when working with the chakras and emotions that they're connected to and the issues that may be present relating to different chakras. And he also talks about how the aim of his work is really to get people into the heart chakra, that anything is possible when we're living in that true essence of love. And we talk about this infinite love as well, this infinite intelligence, and that if that intelligence exists within us, imagine what it could do for us as well when we connect to it. So lots of different aspects and interesting avenues to this conversation. And Mark also shares that he was a total skeptic, and it's only through his own learnings and experiences and what he has seen that he cannot deny the truth of this work. And also towards the end of the conversation, he talks about how he helped his mother-in-law with her cancer diagnosis, and also a company that he's working with now from South Africa that has a cancer protocol and that offers supplements that are really helping people and supportive as well. So again, lots in this conversation, and if you want to find out more on Mark's work or connect with him or find out about the supplements that he is working with now with the cancer protocol, his website is www.markcleary.net. That's Mark, CLEARY.net. And if you are interested in those supplements or more information, you can email him. His email is on his website. I'm not sure if the information is directly on his website, but you can email him and he will send you all the relevant information and work with you that way. But as always as well, all the links for Mark's work and his email I will link on my website, karenmaloney.com, and click the podcast section. Enjoy. Hello, Mark, and welcome. How are you today? And thanks for joining.
Hi, Karen. I'm really good. Thank you. And thanks for asking. Thanks for inviting me. I'm honoured.
Well, I'm really excited to talk today as well, and to have you join this series on cancer, and just to, again, we're just expanding the conversation. We're not dishing out advice and saying this is exactly what you need to do and go do this, but just expanding it and hopefully sharing more information and more on different options and treatment options that maybe just even takes a little bit of fear out of it for a person and invites them to be more curious for themselves. So again, super happy to have you. And maybe if you just give us a little introduction to yourself and your work, first of all.
Okay. So where do I start? As a therapist, or as I like to call myself these days, just a healer or someone who holds space for healing. It all began for me. It's 32 years now when I began training, and I was very lucky to meet this incredible cranial osteopath, and I had a shoulder injury which he helped me with, and that just took me down a journey that I never had dreamt. I often hear people speaking about following their path or their goal or their intuition. I had absolutely no intention of becoming a therapist. I went to this guy's classes to heal my shoulder, and at the end of the first year, I had people knocking on my door because he was encouraging me to practice with friends and family, and I was just doing what he was showing me. And I had aunts and my mother who had struggled with bad backs for many years, all of a sudden feeling free of their back pain, and they were spreading the word, and all of a sudden people were coming looking for me, and I was like, wow, what's going on? I didn't even, if I'm honest, I didn't even know what I was doing. But I pursued and pursued, and it just wasn't going away. I studied with that guy for about 9 years, I think. And in the course of studying with him, he was studying with me. I was a martial arts teacher in those days. And the art that we studied is an ancient art from Japan. They can trace it back over 1200 years. It has a direct lineage through grandmasters. And it's an art form that comes from warrior monks. And the big teaching within it, as a martial art, you have all the fighting elements of it. But he also, the grandmaster, never ever stopped speaking about people having a benevolent heart and living the right way. And when the guy I was studying with, the cranial osteopath, when he came up the levels in the art that he was happy to go to Japan, he was introduced to the grandmaster in Japan, and he basically embraced him, seeing the skills that he had. He's an incredible body worker, and he told him he wanted to translate these ancient Japanese scrolls that taught the medicinal side of the art that we were studying. And that medicinal side is called Amatsu Tatara. It's as old as the art. They can trace it back to 1200 years. And it opened up a completely different way of working with the body, with the understanding that we're an energy as well as a structural force, And with the cranial osteopathy, it was more based on structure. I think as well, when I think back as a guy who was in his late 20s at the time, I was obviously a very physical person, as was this guy. His name was Dennis. But like martial arts, as you grow older in your art, it becomes less physical and more of an energetic thing that you're doing. And it's like the Amatsu became that for me. So as the years went by and I was practicing Amatsu and sharing it with people, and, I've always had such a busy clinic that I run in Dublin. And what I noticed was, as I was getting older and more into it and more into my own personal development, it's the work started to change. My touch started to get lighter. People would say to me, wow, you're doing healing there. You're not doing Amatsu or whatever you call it. You're doing healing. And I would laugh in those days and call those guys hippies, and because I didn't understand what they were talking about.
Yeah.
It hadn't been taught to me. But then I started to visit meditation classes. And as soon as I started to meditate, it absolutely started to open up a much different way, a much different feeling to my work. There was much more depth, and people were reporting back. Although I was focusing on aligning their spine, they were reporting back. They'd come in and say to me, "Hey, would that have an influence on a problem I have in an organ or an illness?" Or a lot of bowel problems seem to be shifting for people. And that really got me thinking, hang on a minute. Although they've spoken about that in osteopathy, in the early days, things like that weren't happening. It was all about physical pain. But the more and more I stepped into meditation, and the more I started to work with these teachers who were teaching me. They were although they were psychotherapists, there was a girl and then a guy, and both of them had developed themselves into things like Buddhism and the ancient practices of the East, and their work was very different to a normal psychotherapist. So the more they delved into me as teaching me a direction to go, through listening to myself intuitively, to following what I felt rather than just doing all the time. Absolutely, my work started to change in the clinic, and I started to realize that, and it took me a long time to admit this to the public, but I started to realize I could sit back and not touch people anymore. I could actually sit in a meditative space and just hold that space for people. And of course, my skeptic mind, I'm an awful skeptic. And I think that's good because it keeps me on my toes and it keeps me humble and all those things, all those nice things. But for me, ultimately, anything I'm doing has to produce a result, because people were coming and I needed them to walk away happy. So my work really started to change and go into those areas. And in the, up to this point today, and it's been a 32-year journey for me as regards working with people. What I noticed as far back as 15 years ago, people, especially with anxiety, they would come and sit in that space just maybe for 4 or 5 weeks, once a week, and they were just reporting back to me that the anxiety was gone completely. They felt like a new person. And a funny one that has happened for a long time, all those years, and still today. Girls who couldn't get pregnant seem to be able to come in and sit in that space, and then a couple of months later they'd be pregnant. So I think there's about 20 children out there that they're from their mother's visit in the clinic. So
that's amazing.
It's interesting where that went for me. But to touch on the subject that we're going to speak about today, I suppose maybe 9 years ago, somebody presented cancer in the room, in the clinic. And it was always something I thought, could we work with that? Would it ever be possible to be able to hold the space for people to release something like cancer? I used to think that way in those days, but nowadays, having trusted that type of work for as long as I have now, it's not about the person releasing the cancer. It's more about the person releasing emotions. And I see the illnesses, whether they're cancer or other illnesses today, what they truly, truly are at the deepest level is blocked emotions that people don't even understand is there, So
So interesting.
Where I've come from to where I am today.
Yeah, amazing. No, thanks for sharing. And I love when you mentioned that medicinal side of body work, and I'm sure that's what we'll delve into as well as relating to cancer. But just before then, really interesting when you mentioned that your touch became less physical and lighter and more energetic. Why do you believe that was, or what do you believe you were connecting with, or what was happening that enabled that more energetic, lighter, or no touch?
Yeah. What is it? I honestly can't answer. because if I was to truly delve in and try to find out what it is, which I have tried, I can't figure it out, to be honest with you. And
Yeah.
I have gone to many places around the world to try and understand it. I think what it is on a personal level for me is the work I've done on myself, my own emotional healing, my own personal development allows me to trust myself to sit and hold that space. And what I definitely see, and again, who knows where this ends up at the end of my time here on this planet? Where is it going to go in the end? But what I see happening to people when somebody lies down in front of me, and it's always a different experience because they're all individuals. But many, many times people say to me, when you had your hand on me and you moved my shoulder, or you held my foot and you moved that, or they'll tell me about treatment that felt like they were having on the table, even as much as that felt like I was having an acupuncture session. What I feel comes into the space is all the knowledge I've built up over the years. It's almost like I can sit back and I try when I teach this work to people, and I always say, when you sit to hold the space, try and take yourself out of the room and try and just trust that the space will be taken care of. And what I absolutely see happening in there, just quite simply from listening to people and their experience, it's like all the knowledge I've built up over those years can be in that space, and the person, whatever the person needs, it seems to get taken care of. Now, I also have, I suppose, looked at many, many years of spiritual guidance. I've gone to a college in England, the Arthur Findley College, where they teach mediumship in many guises over there. Like a healer is a form of a medium. Not fortune teller, but the mediums who do readings, that's a different form of mediumship, and so on and so on. There's many types of it. So I suppose it is a form of mediumship as well, where you're just holding the space for, if that person is connected on that level to themselves, is it their guides or spirit that come in as well? It has many, many aspects to it, that space that I can hold. So where's it coming from? It's a big one, a big question, so.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I agree. And but I think it is a testament to the amount of work a person does for what a channel they can be to hold that
Yeah.
space, to
Yeah.
allow whatever it is. And I believe it's source or creation or divine or whatever. Nobody actually truly knows, but it is there and it is powerful. And
Yeah.
people experiencing that through a session as well. So yeah, so interesting. I just had to ask as well. And
Yeah.
so then, coming to cancer as well, what's your understanding of what's going on when it presents in a person's body?
Yeah, I think it's just a big breakdown in the system. I think it's
Mm.
just way too much stress on the system in many ways. I think where it truly begins at the deepest level is in the emotions of the person, the
Mm.
emotions that they haven't expressed throughout their life. And I think that can affect the way we actually look after ourselves. And when we're not truly nurturing ourselves, whether it's emotionally, physically, spiritually, which includes eating well, I think the whole combination of all those things will create your cancer.
Yeah.
And then you have all the outside influences, all the chemical stuff that's floating around in the world out there. There's so many aspects to it.
Yeah.
But I think the core base level is the fears that we hold and the fears that stop us expressing who we truly are. And it's the worry and the stress of all that holds energy blocks, emotional blocks, and they can manifest into your cancer or the other big illnesses that we have out there. So I use an example for when I'm talking about this, when I'm teaching people. I was married at 25 and separated at 33. And my ex-wife, who was the mother of our child, died at 46 from cancer. And she taught me so much about how a person develops cancer, I knew her from the age of 17. And when you're that age, I know I had no conscious awareness that she didn't about ourselves, never mind the world. And when I look back and I realize how anxious a person she was, she lived on her nerves, and everybody, including me, seen that as a fun loving person. It was always laughter around her. It was giddiness, but it was a very nervous energy to it. If you said boo behind her back, she'd jump through the wall, It was always on the edge. But also you had an individual like that who didn't eat properly at all, ate very little food, and the food she did eat, as I remember it, it would have had a serious lack of nutrition in it. When we got married, she used to joke that the only meal she could give me was a boiled egg, But she also worked in an environment that was full of chemicals. She was a hairdresser. And she worked in that environment from the age of 14 in a small little hairdresser shop. And in those days, the customers could smoke in the room. So when you think about that person getting to the age of 46 and leaving us at that stage, and you look at every aspect of the way she lived, plus emotionally, when we split up, you throw a big broken heart in there as well. And she had difficulty in a relationship then as well that would have added to that broken heart. So when you look at an individual like that and you look back at their whole history, you can absolutely see why this person with a broken heart would develop a breast cancer in her left breast, right where the heart is, And to me, when I see cancer today, this is how I see it. And I've developed through meeting thousands of people in the clinic. My clinic has been one of the busiest you'll ever come across in Ireland. Absolutely. When I'm not there full time anymore, I decided to move on about 6 years ago. But up to that point, if you called, you'd have to wait for a month to get an appointment. Always busy. So I've met thousands and thousands of people. I've also ran courses and workshops and retreats for many years and really getting to know people on them. And to see the person who presents with an illness like cancer, and let's just say it's in the breast. When a person comes to me like that, the first question I'm asking them, and I want to get to know them first, obviously, but then when we get down to, okay, tell me about your love story, and just quite simply asking that question, because it's around the heart chakra, I want to know the love story. And to ask that question, the person just immediately starts to cry. It's almost like, how did you know I have a love story? How did you know I have a broken heart? But in doing that one, if I can step back a little here, when I did martial arts for 27 years, from the age of 20 to 47. But at the age of 40, I walked into a yoga class one day. I was invited to do yoga, and I walked into this yoga class, and it just blew me away. I remember walking out saying, why didn't I find this 15 years ago? I would have been at that age, 40, very, very fit. And although I managed to stay with this class, it was an Ashtanga power yoga class. The guy at the end said to me, how long have you been doing this? And I'd never done it before. And I thought, never. And he kind of said, wow, how did you stick with us? And I thought, well, I'm a bit flexible and I'm fit, so I managed it, but I'm exhausted. And I loved that feeling, that challenge. So I started to pursue yoga. And one of the things that kept popping up was the chakra system. And me, with my skeptic mind, kept thinking, yeah, that's just another one of these mystical things that doesn't mean anything. But I delved and delved and delved and looked more into it. I was reading books about it, but I wasn't getting the answers that I could take into my clinic. This is me. I was saying to myself, this thing is ancient, but how do I adapt it into the clinic? If I can't do that, I'm not going to waste energy on it. So what I realized, because my speciality in the clinic would be correcting lower back problems. So at the lower back, you have the root chakra and the navel chakra. In that big, around that big sacroiliac joint, that if it's not stable, the person can't be stable on a structural level. So I started to think, okay, if somebody hurts their lower back, they have trauma, they have an accident, that's fine. It's an injury. But when you have a person who's a repeat client, who you can help and help them back to balance, but 3 months later they have to come back again, and 3 months later they have to come back again. And I had quite a few of those people coming in and out, getting to know them as friends almost. So I started to wonder, okay, this is in the root chakra and the navel chakra. So what's in there? And the first thing is obviously stability. Stability along with things like I wanted to look at, if a person isn't stable in themselves, what does that mean? And quite obviously to me, it was like, well, okay, do they lack confidence? What's their self-esteem like? Do they trust themselves, type of thing, Can they stand on their own 2 feet? Emotionally, because physically I see that they can't, because it keeps breaking down on them. So would that connect emotionally? And I would ask these questions as I get to know the person. And when I would ask them about confidence and self-esteem, they would say to me, I have none, and so on. And the funny thing was, the more people I asked the same question, I was getting the same answers. So all of a sudden I was taking the chakra system and saying to myself, maybe I can use this in the clinic in my own head. And I created this map running through the chakra system. And basically there's 7 points. So the first one would be, I love the name of the root chakra, root. So if this is an energy system within us, how am I feeding the roots of this energy system? And how do we feed an energy system? We feed it with our thoughts. And our thoughts build emotions, which are all energetic within us. So therefore, if I have no confidence, my thoughts are negative about myself. That affects my self-esteem, the emotion. But the big emotion around that is fear. I'm afraid of myself. So therefore, my roots are being fed with fear. Now, in the second chakra, you have all the sexual organs sit in that area. So what do we do with our sexual organs? When we take them outside of ourselves, we connect with people and we create life through that connection. When a man and a woman come together, they create. So if we bring that internally, what am I creating within myself? And if the emotion is a lack of self-esteem and I have no confidence, I'm creating a weaker energy system, if you like. It's not going to blossom the way it should blossom. But the third chakra then is the solar plexus. Within that as well, it's about, where do we get our deepest feelings? This feeling of, I knew I should have done that and I didn't listen to my gut instinct. So we have that there. And if you have a lack of confidence and self-esteem, then you're not connecting with yourself properly and you're not creating this power within you. So therefore, am I truly going to listen to myself? Now, as I was speaking to people, especially people with cancer, because about 8 years ago, I helped someone through a cancer crisis. They passed the word on to someone else and the same thing happened and so on. And then all of a sudden I was getting lots and lots of calls. But let's say if the person presented cancer in the ovaries, I would ask them about, tell me what you think of yourself. Tell me about, who do you think you are, your connection with yourself. And people would be shaking their head saying, what's he talking about? So I'd drop back to, tell me about your confidence, your self-esteem. And the answer literally would be, I don't have any. So if you take that up through the body and you see all these cancers that women get in the parts that they create life from, like the womb, the ovaries, and so on. Men can get it in the testes and so on. These are all glands around organs. I was getting the same answers back all the time. The emotions were connecting for me so big. But then if you come up to that inner voice and we're shutting that down constantly because we're not listening to it, and I think this is a very, very important one, particularly with cancer. If you keep putting a lid on something and you're not allowing it to express itself, it will get very frustrated. And that frustration will turn to anger. And what drives anger is, or what comes hand in hand with anger is aggression. And how many times do we hear it's an aggressive cancer? And what I found was the people who would present things like liver cancer around that third chakra area, bowel cancer, pancreatic, even in that whole third chakra area, as you got to know them, they were usually the people we know as nice people. How could he get that? He was such a nice guy. And then I would ask, do you ever get angry? No, I wouldn't get angry. Or do you bottle up your anger? And the answers would be yes, and so on. And here you are then meeting the aggressive cancer. And this was all undeniable to me because I've met many, many people. And just speaking this way to them, they're literally telling me the emotion that's attached to their cancer, So, I've seen that so many times happen,
Yeah, and thanks for sharing all that. And I think the more we learn about our bodies, ourselves, our thoughts, our emotions, and how there is a mind-body connection and how they cannot be separated, the more a lot of things make sense. And I remember, I love that you're talking about the emotional aspect, because I think, there's so much unconscious within us that's repressed that we don't know. And like you say, one way to heal is to feel them. They need to be let out in a safe way for ourselves. So what is repressed does manifest into something. And I love that you're seeing this and have this experience, because I remember years ago sitting around a table with friends, and when I spoke about the emotional component of cancer, and I'd lost my dad at this stage, I was completely laughed at. They were like, that's so silly, Karen. Because I think someone got it who was, that picture perfect of, but they were so healthy and they ate well and they exercised. And yes, that's important. But what's going on inside, like you say, what's being repressed?
Absolutely.
What are the thoughts? What are we saying about ourselves? Because that's so important as well. And I love that, you mentioned different parts of the body as well, and the chakras, and how you kind of connect to that maybe repressed emotion for a person. And then how do you help people as well, or what approach do you take as well then if you're working with someone with cancer, once you know kind of where it is and what the underlying emotion may be?
Well, if the person can trust coming at it from that angle, let's say, if they can accept what I'm saying, or as I have that conversation with them, what I truly want to do is get them into the next chakra in the truest way, which is the heart. The workshops and retreats that I run, this is always the aim of them, because I feel you need time to do this. So what I try to do is, by having the conversation and bringing up the conversation around the emotion, and if the person says to me, absolutely, I can take that, I can accept what you're saying, that's me. Well, then what I want to do is bring them into their heart, and I want them to feel the expression of true love from the heart. I want them to literally bask in that feeling, because it's the next chakra. And I do believe now today, and if you'd have asked me, you wouldn't have got this conversation now me 30 years ago, because it was all airy-fairy as far as I was concerned. But now, having worked with so many people and having experienced it myself, to find true love in your heart, I do believe that can heal anything. If you can honestly sit with yourself in that feeling, it has the power to shift anything, because
Mm-hmm.
then I'm breaking the emotions. As I speak about this when I'm teaching, I find, here's something I say almost all the time. Imagine what it's like. Maybe there's a reason we don't remember this, but imagine what it must be like in the womb. Imagine the first thing that must happen to us is our heartbeat. It has to be, without the heartbeat, there's no life. So is that the first thing we hear in the womb? Or is our mother's, when our senses start to come, is our mother's heartbeat the first thing we hear? Now, can you imagine what that's like? I don't know if we can truly imagine it, but how safe and pure must that feel to a little infant for the gestation period right through until they come into the world? And when we come out of there, is that the loss or the love, the feeling that we end up looking for the rest of our lives? And we try to find it in others to make us feel good, in love, to be in love. But can we find that in ourselves? Because that's truly where we heard it first. So if we can get to that pure state, I believe truly that anything can be healed from that place,
Yeah. Wow.
And
That's beautiful. And I
that's what
just
I
want to
look for.
take a moment to soak that in because,
Yeah.
wow. For me, it aligns as well with like the medical community still to this day cannot explain why or when the heart starts beating in a fetus.
Mm.
It's like they don't know what is it that causes that initial first beat to come
Yeah.
in. But then from the
Yeah.
yogic tradition, they say that's when the soul enters. And
Yeah.
what you've just said there as well, then from birth, and is that the love that we're then spend
We're
our
looking
lives
for.
looking for? That
Mm.
makes so much sense for me. And even that sense of separation, because I believe
Yeah.
the root of everything really is a separation, and it's a separation from our true selves and
Yeah.
from the bigger picture of the universe, the soul. So, wow, I just got goosebumps when you shared that. And I was like, that makes so much sense. And I think that comes back then as well to when we're in a healing space, and that space of love that you're talking about. I believe it can heal anything because the body is programmed for self healing. It knows what to do, but we
Mm.
need to be able to put ourselves in that space. So I love just what you shared. That was amazing.
Yeah, there's an incredible, having studied yoga, if you look at the teachings and they speak about this energy that resides within us, and it's an energy that's been there since the beginning of time and will be there till the end of time. We're borrowing it for a few years while we're here. But if that's true, and if it's true, yeah, imagine the intelligence that's in there. There's nothing like that if that's real. So yes, of course, if we can connect with it, anything and everything is possible. So we just have to stop and try to realize that concept. So
Yeah,
yeah,
wow. I love that. And also, it's the truth of, and it's nobody's fault because we're so clueless
no,
to the
no,
power we hold and what's held within and unconsciously and our thoughts and how they affect us. But
yeah,
again, I'm always like, if it's true that it holds a power and if it's true that we have this influence over ourselves, well, then why not open up to look at other aspects? Why not open up to look at your emotions, to heal them, to release them, to
yeah,
see if it has a positive effect or not? There's kind of nothing to lose, and it takes our curiosity. And I think when people often hit cancer or some crisis, that's when often, although they may still be skeptic, that's often when they will be willing to open up to something else, because it's kind of like a life or death situation. It's like,
yeah,
okay, what can I do here? And I think the people who do go on a self-exploring journey as well, I often think they have, I don't want to say a better chance, but they find more will maybe for themselves than maybe others who just totally outsource their
yeah.
choices or decisions, or make decisions from a place of fear. And I saw that as well with my own dad. So how do you help people then as well, on the emotional aspect? How can people release emotions safely in order to not have them repressed and resonating within the body?
Yeah, what I do is where I've seen that work best for me is when I have people on a retreat for a week. And every day we do exercises, we do meditative visualizations, and we have these deep conversations, which I truly believe set intention. And when the person connects with the conversation, for instance, I've had 30 people on a Zoom screen, or I've had up to 20 people on a retreat. And when I would have this conversation and I'd work through the whole chakra system right up to the crown chakra, afterwards people would say to me, it was like you were speaking to me. But they'd all say that to me. So they're all getting different pieces of it.
Yeah.
So once that goes in, I believe that they see it as a truth. That's where this intelligence inside us, it's almost like as they see that as a truth, as they hear it, feel it inside themselves, now it's a thought. And remember, the negative thoughts have created the negative energy system. So then if we can sit with breath, breathing into these areas and open up a flow of energy, it's amazing how the anxiousness and the anger and the fears can leave that way, you know. And that's how I try to work with it. I'm running a course at the moment, and it's an 8-week course, and we've just finished let me think. Yeah, we just finished the second one last Monday. We have the third one this Monday. And this week, a few of the people on the course have called me and they're upset and they can't stop crying and they're like, how the hell is this happening to me? I'm just sitting with this meditation each day. And I'm saying, congratulations, just let it happen. Just don't even try to understand it. It can be as ancient as yourself. So it can be things that we held on to from infancy that we don't remember. So trusting that I'm allowing energy to flow from me and feeding that energy with intention has worked great for me as a teacher, showing people how to do that. I've seen life changes, you know. But the other thing, getting back to the cancer that you mentioned on there, the big emotion around cancer is fear. And I have worked with people who sadly has passed away, but one of the things that they pass away with is peacefulness instead of being terrified and taking those last breaths, let's say, in fear, which is usually when you see the person not having a nice death. But to see them changing over the weeks, coming towards their ending and bringing a sense of peacefulness in, that can be a beautiful thing as well, you know. In one way, that's a very powerful healing as well, because now they're going to wherever it is we go to in a much gentler, more peaceful way, you know. So yeah, it's breaking that fear for people. That is the single most important thing. And people don't realize they live in these fears, you know. And like you said there a while back, it's not anybody's fault. It's absolutely the fault of the society that we live in. We've lost touch with that deeper side of ourselves that these great Eastern philosophies teach to us. I've been very lucky to study an ancient Japanese system which teaches that benevolent heart. Then I find this traditional Tantra Yoga teacher in India, and he's just like the Grand Master in Japan. He has all this great ancient wisdom, and they're identical to each other the way they teach. They're teaching the same thing, which the bottom line is to have a benevolent heart and to be empowered. And if you can have that, I don't believe anything can touch you. We all have to pass out of this life at some point of something, but can we leave peacefully? You know, that's the way I see it. And if we can do that, then the cancer doesn't matter really, you know. But at the same time, if we want to look at how do we heal cancer, you know, it's very important as well.
Yeah.
And there's many ways.
Yeah, and you know, that's the intention again with these conversations, because like that, I was that person, especially after seeing my dad's journey. I had such incredible fear. And I mean, it's a really loaded word anyway. But I was terrified. And I thought, oh my God, if that ever happened to me, like, no way, I wouldn't even try, because my dad went the conventional route. Not that there's anything wrong with
Okay.
that. He wanted to look at things outside of that as well, but he didn't. He didn't feel he had time. And then there was other issues.
Yeah.
So I just was like, absolutely no way. I wouldn't even try. Like, I just bow out or whatever and say thank you very much. But then I
Yeah.
went to my own just curiosity learning, and I've just learned so much. And it's like, oh, it's actually not so scary. It's multifaceted, yes. But
Yeah.
there's like that, there's roots, there's the emotional aspect, there's the mental, there's the physical. And if I can look at all these different aspects, it is possible. And that's my intention anyway as well for having these conversations. If it can remove a
Yeah.
little bit of fear, then it's worth it. Because if we're
Absolutely.
living from a
Absolutely.
place of fear in any sense in our life, it is not supportive on any level.
No. We're not nurturing ourselves when we're in fear, And unfortunately then that you can have the root cause of the issue being fear. But as I say, that fear tends to not encourage me to nourish myself, in the sense of I'm scared to step out into the world to do things that serve my higher self. And that comes in many aspects, which is you'll usually comfort eat, or maybe turn to alcohol or whatever people turn to in addictive modes. But the bottom line there is they're just not looking after themselves because they're scared, and they don't even know that they're scared. And then that develops into a minefield, and it's how the things like cancer can come, because over many, many years of that, it just has to manifest into a physical thing. And I often hear myself speaking again as I'm teaching, and why do so many women get breast cancers? And the amount of them I've met, and when I ask them about their broken heart, they all have a story, or some of them have 2 or 3 stories. But then, why don't guys get breast cancers like the women do? What's the difference? But when you look at it, men of that age group as well tend to get heart attacks. Much more men die of heart attacks than women. And especially men, once they get to the mid-40s onward. So is that the same blocked heart, that they haven't got the same physical body? Does the woman get affected in a different way to the man? It's a question I like to throw out there. I'm not saying I have the answers to that one, but again, I've seen it so much, with the broken man, the man who's had the broken heart and didn't express that out to the world. And then bang, he has a heart attack, so this fear-driven space that people live in is wow, it's such a minefield, and brings so many illnesses with it.
But like you said earlier as well, like, the thing about it is, it all makes sense. And like you mentioned earlier about your ex-wife's journey, I could say the exact same about my dad. When we look back, it's like, it all makes sense. It doesn't just appear out of the sky. Like, if a tumor shows up, we're living with it between 8 and 15 years before it shows up. So it all makes sense. But again, it's the power of moving beyond the fear to be able to move into that mindset of knowing that this is not my fault. There are reasons, but I can reverse it. And that is the possibility. And it's that curiosity as well of, well, imagine this intelligence that exists within there. And imagine this energy, like you mentioned, that energy since the beginning of time that we carry. Imagine trying to connect to that in any way. You mentioned visualization, deep conversations, meditation, but that is that heart-led divine energy. So
it's amazing. And can I tell you another story? Do we have time? Have we?
Go for it.
Just 2.5 months ago, we lost my partner's mother. She'd been living with us since last March, but part of the reason I'm in Spain is 6.5 years ago we moved to Spain, but it's a bit of a long story, but we ended up having to move close to my partner's mother because her husband had a stroke. And then 6 months after that, her mother had pneumonia, and when she went to the hospital, they said to us, she has a tumour on her lung, but she's too sick for us to even consider looking at it. We need to get this pneumonia sorted first before we do anything. So it took them a few months to get her fit enough to address the lung tumour. So they lived in the countryside, so she had to travel for 2 hours to go to meet an oncologist, and she met the oncologist and she booked her in and said, look, this tumour is isolated in your lung. We'll be able to remove it and give you treatment and it'll be fine. So that was the plan. So she came back a couple of weeks later to have that operation. The surgeon opened her up, and lo and behold, when the first scan was done in March, this was July, so it's many months later. But they were working off the scan from March, and when they opened her up, the tumour had grown and had gone through the whole chest cavity and attached itself to her aorta. And so now it's on the heart. And you don't get heart cancer, but this was on the aorta. So they couldn't remove it. They couldn't cut it away. She'd bleed out. They couldn't radiate it. Same thing could happen. And they offered chemotherapy, but they said it won't work. So she refused the chemotherapy. She was really brave. She'd always said she wouldn't have chemotherapy in any way if she got cancer. So she said to the oncologist, it's okay. If this is what I have, this is what I have. She did ask questions like, will it be aggressive? Will I be sick? And the answer was yes. And then, will I lose my hair? You will. So she said, well, what's the point in me? This was her word. She said, what's the point in me being bald with my head down the toilet for the next 6 months if I'm not going to get better? So they agreed to leave it at that. So we took her home, and I had all this knowledge built up, and I thought, I wonder, can we do anything here? And the big buzz then, as is out there in the world now, was around cannabis oil. So in Spain, we were very lucky that we could get cannabis oil through clubs, so you weren't breaking the law or doing anything like that. So great. You can also grow your own plants down here. And we got on top of that as well, because the oil is a bit expensive. But we followed the Rick Simpson protocol. People out there will know that protocol. We followed that. We also, she was very sick, very, very sick. So she couldn't really eat well. So we gave her a vegan diet. Now, it was kind of the only thing we could give her, because everything she was having in those early days were smoothies. So it was all organic. It was all done properly. And we started to do this with her and give her the gram of oil a day in suppository form, because she was 70 at the time and you didn't want her being high, and feeding her as much of the smoothies as we could. And then I have in the back of my mind, I need to talk to this woman as soon as she's ready for these conversations. And because she was living with us, I was able to have those deep conversations with her. And we went right back into her story, into her childhood, and the things that, like, I don't want to go deep into her story. It's so a private story, but things like watching her younger brother die when she was 3 years of age through a little accident. The girl who was left minding her, telling her he's never coming home. She spoke to me about the shock she felt even as a young girl when she heard that, when she seen him falling where he fell, and then not coming home. Then when she was older, there was another big story in her life that, again, we'll keep it private, but a huge emotional story for her as a woman. So the sorrow that she carried, deep sorrow that she'd never been allowed to express, was keeping her from being her ultimate self, if you like, you know. It was all embedded into her deep. And they say in Chinese medicine, the lungs hold sorrow. And it's deep in the lungs. But for me then, it was no coincidence that it attaches to the heart, because her story was all about the loss of love throughout her life, you know, and not being able to express true love in a situation that she had to deal with in her 20s. And here you were with a woman all these years later, and where does the cancer present itself? Right on the heart. And we sent her home to look after her husband, who had a stroke previously, was sick, in danger of losing his leg with a diabetic ulcer. 3 months in our house. She was fit enough to go home and look after him. Amazing. And we had a scan done 9 months later, and the tumour, although it was still there, had reduced by more than half, but it was dead. There was no cancer. They did the blood test, they did everything. It was dead. And she passed away 10 weeks ago. And on the report, although they were treating her as a palliative care patient, no cancer in the body. To this, the cancer never came back. She had other issues that were going back 20 years that they actually said was the side effects of the medication were always going to do this to her in the end. So that was fair enough. But the beautiful thing was that cancer didn't reappear. To me, that showed to approach it through your food, to use a medicine that can actually, because people don't really truly understand what cannabis does to a cancer cell, but to be able to use that to actually address it directly, but then to emotionally have those deep conversations and get a sense of understanding that this has a part to play and I'm okay to speak this out and allow it to release that from my heart. And here we were with a patient who was all of a sudden 3 months. And the funny thing is, she'd been given 3 to 6 months. And so it was, for me, that was right on my doorstep to be able to put into practice everything I'd been doing, helping people. It was amazing, so. No one's going to convince me otherwise.
I know. Yeah, but the thing is, there's loads of stories like that. But again, it's where we focus our attention. And if we stay in the fear and all the negative and the bad stories, that's what we're going to experience more of. But again, if we look for the good stories and people thriving and surviving, and they're there as well. And I think that's the point as well. So I absolutely love that. And again, what you just shared there as well in her story and it presenting when it did, I also believe this is the incredible intelligence of our body, that it can put up with this stuff for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years before something presents. But the thing is, we can't outrun ourselves. And that's the truth I've come to in my work and my journey, my own learnings, that, it's either be a little, again, because it's not fault, but be a little curious and proactive about your life and what's going on inside of you before some disaster strikes.
And so, unfortunately, most people, conscious awareness is, I believe it should be taught to children in the schools, and it's not. And I agree. It is what it is. The funny thing I like to say to people again when I'm teaching, it's been said that over the centuries, people gather around the biggest buildings, i.e. you had castles and the little towns would build around the castle. Then when the castles were moving on, the big churches came up and they're the places where people would congregate then, But nowadays, what are the biggest buildings in our modern society today? And where do people go at the weekends with full car parks and so on and so on? They're the shopping centres. And we're being driven to them through false materialistic things, And it's society that drives us towards it. So we forget then about conscious awareness because we're being driven towards that instead, And then it's too late for some people to even bring that into their comprehension, that I've played a part. I've played a part. And if I've played a part in creating it, I can play a part in healing it,
Yes.
It's that.
That is the truth.
It can be that simple.
Is the truth.
Yeah.
And that's my approach I take as well. And I have this, again, everything is curiosity, even with my work. And I'm like, well, what if there was a part you played? What if, and again, this is totally unconscious, but what if there was something? But just like you said there, if that means you can create it unconsciously, that also means you can create what you do want consciously.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the work.
Absolutely.
So I love it, Mark. Thank you so much for sharing. And please, if there's anything else that you feel called to share, please do. And please also share where people can find out more in your work.
Okay. Well, the great thing that I can share is, and thanks for allowing me to do this. Obviously, I have seen results with people with cannabis oil, but unfortunately, cannabis oil isn't a thing that we can get our hands on legally. and it's a definite no-no in Ireland. So, I know there's many people out there sourcing it and getting it, and I just want to say this out loud. I cannot get it, and I don't get it for people. Yeah, no, honestly, I don't. But I have just in the last year been lucky enough to, I believe these things come to us when we're open to them. There's a great company in South Africa, and they do the most incredible high-end nutraceuticals, supplements. They're all absolutely nature in a capsule, and they have many different types of supplements that they share. But they run a natural oncology program in line with people who are on chemotherapy and under the guidance of oncologists in hospitals and all. And one of the products, if I can mention it, is a product called salvestrol. And salvestrols were discovered about 25 years ago by two professors in England who were developing chemotherapy drugs for a pharmaceutical company. And what they quickly realized, although they could copy the compound and it would kill the cancer cell the same way, it came nowhere near killing on the level that the natural compound could do. There was no comparison. But their job was to develop chemotherapy drugs. They were doing it for prostate cancer, if I remember. So they released this information out to a friend of theirs who was a journalist, and he wrote a book about it. And this company, the guy who runs this company, his mother had cancer, and he kept her alive for 4 years longer than she should have lived just by using salvestrols. And what salvestrols does in the cell, it switches on an enzyme called the CYP1B1 enzyme. And when that enzyme is switched on in the cancer cell goes into apoptosis. It literally commits suicide. And it's a very, very powerful supplement. And I have that available these days. Under the guidance of this company, they have an incredible woman who's in her 70s. She's been around the medical world for many, many years, all her life, all her career. And she works with these guys. She understands all the chemotherapy drugs. So what I can do now for people, which is marvelous, it's just getting the word out, is if you present cancer, I take your history, your medical history, I take your latest blood results, and the treatment plan from the hospital, and I send that off to these guys, and they work out a supplementation program to run alongside your treatment program. And the couple of people I've seen use the program were expected to be very sick with the side effects of their chemotherapy and to lose their hair, the usual. And what's been amazing is there's been no side effects from the chemotherapy. And they're doing very well, the people that are on the program, except one. We did lose my uncle last year, but again, without getting personal stories, we all have a story, but he did so well that at one point, the oncologist asked him to give up the supplements because he didn't understand why he was doing so well, and he wanted to see, was it the supplements or the chemotherapy? And unfortunately, he got sick when he gave up the supplements, So I have that program available to people if they get in touch with me. And how do they get in touch with me? Yeah. My website is markcleary.net. I have a lot of videos on my YouTube channel, and there's an in-depth video that I just recorded this week with my educator on supplements. He knows salvestrols much more intimately than me. So there's a video on my YouTube channel, again, just under my name, Mark Cleary, and you'll see it. It's titled Salvestrols and AHCC, which is another very powerful immune boosting compound that they use. So that's available there. And I think you're going to put up the links to my other social medias in there, aren't you?
Yes, I will. Amazing, Mark. And I'm sure you'll have lots of people maybe reaching out. But yes, I will have all the links to your website, to your YouTube, where people can find that video, to all your socials and everything. And yeah, if people want to reach out, they can. So thank you so much, Mark, for joining and for sharing today.
Thank you again for inviting. It's been a pleasure. Always happy to share good news.
Thanks for listening. And before you go, I would love to ask you a massive favor. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode of the podcast, I would love for you to leave a short review on Apple Podcasts to help it grow. If you could do that, I would greatly appreciate it.